Hi, I'm Alith. My family said I wasn't welcome at my own father's birthday dinner because I wouldn't feel comfortable. So I stood outside the country club I owned while my mother smiled for cameras inside. But the worst part? It wasn't the exclusion. It was the decades they spent pretending I never existed, rewriting the family story without me in it. They replaced my name, my seat, my memories. And the night I decided not to stay silent, a valet looked me in the eye and said, "Your suite is ready, Madam Owner." Want to know what happened next? I had parked outside Greenville Heritage Country Club 15 minutes ago, and I still hadn't turned off the engine. The air was warm, humid, like most late spring evenings in South Carolina. My fingers hovered over my phone screen, rereading the message from Verda for the 5th time. "Please don't come tonight. This dinner is for family. You wouldn't feel comfortable." There was a certain artistry in her cruelty, soft edges, polite punctuation, like it was meant to protect me rather than erase me. But that's what it was. An erasure. Polished, intentional, final. The engine's hum blended with the faint jazz music seeping from the main building's patio. I watched the valet boys open doors for sleek SUVs, their passengers dressed in shades of wealth, pearls, pressed collars, polished nails, and the ease of people who had always been told, "You belong." I wasn't one of them. Not in their eyes. Not anymore. Just as I was debating whether to leave or prove a point, I spotted Camilla. She was walking arm in arm with her husband, Mark, up the marble steps. She used to braid my hair in 5th grade, pass me notes in history class. We once carved our initials into a bench at the lake. I rolled down the window an inch. She glanced in my direction. I smiled, raised my hand slightly, like a small flag of recognition. She looked right through me, then turned her head, leaned closer to her husband, and laughed at something he said. The laughter sliced sharper than the message from my mother. That's the thing about people. You always remember who stood by you, but more painfully, who deliberately chose not to. A flash from the past hit me. 4th of July, years ago. I was 10. The club was hosting a family picnic. I had spilled grape juice on Verda's pale heels. New, imported, a gift from your father. She didn't yell. No, she leaned down, whispered so tightly her breath burned, "Don't embarrass us." That sentence aged worse than any insult ever could. It was her family motto. Outside the windshield, another valet bowed as a woman stepped out of a black Escalade, heels clicking like punctuation on pavement. "Alith, you're stalling," I told myself. "This is no longer about the party. It's about the pattern." I looked down at what I was wearing, a black silk dress, understated but tailored. My clutch was worn but elegant, and inside it, a letter. A birthday letter for my father. I had written it 3 nights ago after waking from a dream where he actually asked me how I'd been. I adjusted the rearview mirror, caught sight of my own eyes. Tired, yes, but not broken. One more deep breath. I stepped out of the car. The heat brushed against my legs. The parking lot gravel crunched under my heels. With every step toward the entrance, memories bubbled. The year I was passed over for a scholarship dinner, the Christmas where my name wasn't on the family card, the baby shower they didn't tell me about. At the top of the stairs, the doors glowed with warm light. Laughter echoed beyond them. I wasn't supposed to be here, but I had shown up anyway. A valet made eye contact but said nothing. His face didn't register recognition. Or maybe it did, and he'd been told not to act on it. When I reached the main doors, a young hostess in a navy dress stood behind a podium. She didn't glance up. Her hand lifted, palm out, a quiet signal to stop. No words, just a gesture. The young hostess didn't lift her gaze, just raised her hand like a crossing guard for invisible traffic. I stopped 2 steps from the podium, my heels tapping to silence. Her voice was cool, pre-scripted. "This event is private, members only." "I'm Alith Lovell," I said, calmly but with weight. She finally looked up, blinked at the tablet in front of her, and began to scroll. Her brows drew together just slightly, enough for me to recognize that I was not just missing. I'd been removed. "I don't see your name," she said, still polite. "You wouldn't," I replied. "It's not a mistake. It's a choice." After a long pause, she tilted the tablet away and stepped to the side. "Please don't cause a scene." I nodded once and stepped through the doors into a world that had once known my name. Everything inside sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung like expensive icicles, casting golden prisms over tables dressed in linen and family pride. My heels sank ever so slightly into the plush carpet as I moved across the entrance hall, feeling both underdressed and overdressed at the same time. The laughter bounced off the marble, bright and exclusionary. Some faces turned toward me, then quickly away, as if they'd looked directly at the sun and regretted it. I stood for a beat, letting the familiarity wash over me like a scalding shower. Then I heard her voice. "Verda." She stood near the head table, mic in hand, framed by floral arrangements and subtle power. "My daughter Isolde, who continues to make us proud with her new position at the firm. Her strength has always grounded this family. And my son Miles, whose calm presence holds us together. They are my pride. They are my joy." Nothing. No pause. Not even a glance in my direction. Not an oversight. A scalpel. I scanned the room as she went on, thanking donors, longtime family friends, and those who understand the values we hold dear. The edges of the speech were polished to hide the blade, but I felt every cut. My attention shifted to a board propped up on an easel. The seating chart. I walked closer. Rows of neatly typed names matched to table numbers, each denoting status, alliances, history. I looked for mine. It wasn't there. Then I saw it, faint but unmistakable. Underneath a taped-on name tag, the letters Ale, still barely visible, as though someone had rushed, but not enough to erase me cleanly. The new name? Mr. Dean Lovell, Isolde's boyfriend. Of course. I didn't tear the paper off. That would have been too loud, too dramatic. Instead, I just stood there, memorizing the slight curve of the tape, the way it bent like an afterthought. The room pulsed around me, full of clinking glasses and small talk. But none of it touched me. I made my way toward the table I should have been at. It was already full. Isolde laughing softly, Miles mid-conversation, Verda seated like a queen presiding over her curated court. As I approached, Verda looked up. Her expression didn't change. No surprise, no guilt, just a cool nod of acknowledgement. "Didn't expect you to come," she said softly, almost pleasantly. "You weren't on the RSVP." "I was never on your list," I replied, my voice low but steady. "Was I?" She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I stood there for a second, letting that truth settle into the room like dust. No one made room. No one gestured for me to sit. The space had been rewritten, without me. As I turned to walk away, my shoulder brushed against a man's as he pulled out the very chair that once had my name. I didn't go far, just toward the edge of the ballroom, where the lighting dimmed and the noise softened. There was a side table near the windows, far from the curated family tableau unfolding under crystal chandeliers. I sat there, quietly folding into the periphery, like a forgotten coat in the wrong season. No one asked me to leave. No one acknowledged that I was there. I sipped my drink slowly, the wine leaving a dry warmth at the back of my throat. From where I sat, I could see it all. The toasts, the perfect smiles, the camera flashes bouncing off Verda's pearl earrings. If I squinted, I could almost believe I had imagined the last 20 years. Almost. My fingers grazed the locket, resting against my collarbone, a tiny gold oval no larger than a quarter. It had once belonged to me. Given to me by Rainer, my father, the night I won the state math championship. I was 15, flushed with joy and surprise, and he'd slipped it into my palm with a rare softness in his voice. "You see what no one else sees," he had said, almost whispering. "That's your gift. Use it wisely." He had been right. I did see things others didn't, like the small, silent ways people erased you, one decision at a time. Now, across the room, that same locket hung on Isolde's neck. Aelith, it's just an accessory, I told myself. Don't make it a symbol. But Verda had given it to her after Rainer's funeral, and never mentioned it to me. It was the kind of wound that didn't bleed. It just sat there under the skin, quietly shaping everything you did afterward. I opened my clutch slowly, feeling the familiar weight of the letter inside. Folded, creased, but never opened since I placed it there. I unfolded it now, hands steady. The ink was unmistakable, Rainer's sharp, slanted script. His words didn't meander. They carved. You don't have to earn your seat at this table. You built the damn legs, sweetheart. That was the last thing he ever wrote to me. And he was right, except they'd taken the table, the chairs, and even the nameplate with it. Someone called for a family photo. The photographer moved like he was coordinating a parade, shouting directions, adjusting angles, moving people like chess pieces. Let's have Mom and the kids, Isolde, Miles, step forward. Yes, just the immediate family, please. I stayed in my seat. There was no confusion, no expectation I'd be called. Verda didn't glance my way. She posed beautifully, shoulder turned, hand on hip, like a woman who had never doubted she belonged. The camera clicked 3 times in quick succession. The moment was captured, and I wasn't in it. It reminded me of being 8 years old. Dinners back then were rigid affairs, napkins folded like origami, silence expected, unless spoken to. There had always been 3 chairs at the round table. Mine was a stool in the kitchen, until a neighbor once asked why I wasn't in the family portrait. After that, a 4th chair appeared. Not pulled out, just there. The illusion of inclusion. I drained the rest of my wine and set the glass down without a sound. No one noticed. The band began playing something upbeat, and the conversation swelled again. I watched a waiter refill glasses with the kind of focus that made you wonder if he knew more than he let on. It struck me then that I wasn't angry anymore. I was tired of explaining myself, of waiting to be asked, of pretending that the 4th chair had ever really been for me. I folded the letter slowly, like sealing away the only person who had ever seen me whole. Isolde was handed the microphone just as the band played a soft closing note. She stepped up like a pageant winner, a perfect smile resting on her flawless face. The room dimmed slightly, just enough to cast a spotlight over her sequined neckline. She didn't thank the host. She didn't need to, because according to the world, she already was. "We're so blessed," she began, voice smooth like a politician's, "to be surrounded by those who truly matter." Polite chuckles. A few lifted glasses. I didn't blink. Her eyes brushed across the room, landed on mine for less than a second. She smiled. Not at me, past me, like I was glass. I let my gaze drift elsewhere, toward the corner of the hall where the gift table sat, covered in boxes wrapped with silver bows and cream-colored envelopes tucked under ribbons. Mine was there. I spotted it easily, slightly off-center, pale blue, wrapping with a navy satin bow I tied myself. The tag had been flipped over, as if by accident, though I knew better. I walked over and turned the card upright. To Rainer, happy birthday. Simple, clear. Behind me, I heard the familiar click of heels. You brought something? Verda's voice carried just enough to turn heads nearby. I hope you didn't overspend. You know your sister's gift will shine enough for all of us. I didn't answer. Just adjusted the edge of the ribbon. She lingered for a second, then moved on as though we hadn't spoken at all. I wasn't angry, not in the way people think rage works. Mine was quieter, like the pressure behind a dam, constant and deliberate. I walked toward the coat room area, just off the main hallway, enough to be dimly lit but not fully private. Verda was standing near the mirror, fixing her lipstick. Why did you erase me? I asked. She didn't turn. You chose to step out of this family long ago. I simply followed your lead. I let the silence grow between us before replying. I didn't step out. I stepped away, from your shadow. You just couldn't follow me into the light. She paused, then met my gaze in the mirror. You always wanted to be the victim, Aleth. That's not a legacy. That's a burden. And just like that, she capped her lipstick and walked off. By the time I returned to the main room, the servers were preparing for dinner. I walked back toward my old table, not really expecting anything, but still foolishly hoping. A waiter intercepted me. Sorry, ma'am, he said gently. This table is now reserved for confirmed guests only. He didn't sound smug. He sounded apologetic, like he knew what this meant. I watched as he removed the plate that had once been mine, the wine glass I hadn't touched yet, and replaced them with a fresh setting, for someone else. The seat that once bore my name, unofficially, emotionally, was gone, just like the ones before it. No one at the table said a word. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. I found a chair in the back, one meant for overflow, not even near a table, just up against the paneled wall, under a sconce. I didn't sit. I stood, holding the backrest lightly with one hand, watching. Verda's gaze kept flicking my way, like she could feel the weight of my presence. Isolde tried harder to laugh louder, toast with more enthusiasm, touch Dean's arm with performative affection. But I was still there, and they knew it. I didn't need a chair to have a place, and yet, through all their rearranging, they still hadn't figured out how to make me disappear. The music had shifted into something forgettable by the time I reached the head table again. Conversations bubbled, laughter floated in calculated bursts. But when I stopped behind my once seat, silence spread like a ripple. I didn't wait for anyone to notice. I made them. I see you've made it very clear, I said, my voice calm but not soft. I don't belong here. So let me be just as clear back. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The stillness around me did most of the work. Verda blinked slowly, hand resting on the stem of her glass, her fingers coiled just tight enough to hint tension beneath the poise. Isolde didn't flinch. She never did. She was good at holding her character. So I looked at Dean, her boyfriend, seated now in what used to be mine. Then I pointed to the gift table behind us, toward the pale blue box still untouched. You see that? It's not a watch or wine or some clever inside joke in wrapping paper. It's a deed. To the villa in Hilton Head. A low murmur rolled across the table. I had it transferred back into Dad's name, I continued, pausing just long enough. He loved that place before we turned it into a bargaining chip. I bought it back last year. Dean shifted. Verda's lips tightened. I was going to give it to him tonight, quietly, but then I saw the seating chart, saw my name missing, saw the speech. And I thought, why should I be quiet? Someone near the end of the table actually gasped. It was subtle, maybe performative, but I appreciated the drama of it. Isolde stood suddenly and walked toward me, grabbing my elbow just hard enough to imply she thought I might make a scene. What's your endgame here? She hissed through her clenched jaw, her smile frozen for the audience behind her. The truth, that's all, I replied, brushing her hand away. She stepped closer, the air between us suddenly thick. You were never part of this family. You never wanted to be a Lovell. So why are you standing here now? Because the name never belonged to you alone, I said. And for once, I didn't care who heard it. Verda rose then, gracefully, as if on cue. She always knew when to reclaim a room. Ladies, she said smoothly, placing a light hand on Isolde's shoulder. Let's not turn this into a spectacle. I turned my head toward her. You caused the spectacle, I said, the moment you printed a seating chart without my name on it. The guests at nearby tables began to find sudden interest in their salad forks. Verda's composure cracked for just a second, one breath caught between pride and panic, before she smiled tightly. Isolde tried to speak again, but I raised my hand, stopping her. I turned back to the full table, now watching me like I was both the villain and the storm. I didn't leave this family, I said louder this time. I left the lie it became. And then I walked. Not out the door, not defeated, but deeper into the club, toward the West Lounge. I didn't care who followed or who whispered behind my back. That room wasn't mine anymore, and I didn't want it. They had erased my name from the table, but tonight I wrote it in permanent ink across their legacy. The West Lounge was already half full by the time I stepped in. Dimmed lighting made the chandeliers glisten like they were sweating under the weight of polite conversation. Glasses clinked. People smiled too wide. It was the part of the evening when everyone pretended they weren't tired, and where the legacy talk began. I stood just inside the archway, invisible to most, but not to everyone. On the makeshift stage near the fireplace, a familiar figure from the Chamber of Commerce was mid-speech. "And of course," he said, lifting his glass, "we celebrate Verda Lovell's continued contribution to the fabric of this community. And her daughter Isolde. What a future leader, already doing so much to extend the family's legacy." Applause followed. Someone near the bar let out a whistle. I stepped further into the room. No one invited me, but no one stopped me either. I was halfway toward the front when Verda's voice rang out. "Oh, before we go any further, just a quick word." She walked with ease, smile flawless, hair still in perfect place. She reached for the mic before anyone could question her. "Tonight is about unity," she said, nodding gently to the crowd. "It's about recognizing the people who show up, the ones who do the work, not just the ones who pop in when the spotlight shines." Her eyes found mine for the briefest moment. She didn't break her smile. "Real family," she added, "doesn't need a microphone to matter." Polite laughter. Someone in the crowd muttered, "Well said." I didn't respond. I just stood there, calm, straight-backed, the kind of stillness that makes people nervous. I could feel the tension around me, like the floor itself had become an unwelcome guest. In the far corner, a camera crew was live-streaming the event for the local paper. 3 cameras, 2 operators. I noticed something strange. They hadn't turned in my direction once, not even when I'd walked straight into the spotlight. I approached one of the crew quietly. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice low, "you've skipped me 3 times. Is that coincidence or instruction?" He hesitated, then leaned in. "We were asked not to show you, Ms. Lovell's request." I nodded once. No anger, just confirmation. I returned to the side of the lounge, pulled my phone from my bag, found the file I'd been holding onto for months, connected to a discreet Bluetooth speaker I'd hidden in my clutch. I pressed play. At first, only I heard it. Then the room quieted. Rayner's voice filled the space. "If you're hearing this," he said, calm and direct, "then my girl Aelith has finally had enough of being silent. I just want to say, you don't need a title to lead. You don't need their blessing to be what you already are. You're the builder, the engine. You're the one." A few gasps, one glass cracked against tile. I didn't flinch. Verda's face had frozen, eyes narrowed. Isolde looked stunned, but quickly tried to laugh it off, glancing around like this was all some awkward mistake. I didn't look at them. I looked at the crowd. And one by one, heads began to turn toward me. Someone near the bar gave a soft nod. Then another, and another. They may have cut the mic, but I brought the voice that matters. For a moment after the audio faded, no one breathed. Rayner's voice had landed like a fault line splitting the room. And then it was Verda who moved first, always her. She smiled, a little too quickly, clapped her hands like she could erase what had just been heard with applause. "Well, that was touching," she said. "Let's all get back to enjoying the evening." The applause never came, just whispers. It didn't take long before some faces began to turn toward one another. There were those in the crowd who'd known my father well enough to recognize his tone, his phrasing. That message wasn't manufactured, it was real, and it had been saved for this exact moment. I didn't need to say anything. Not yet. Isolde stepped forward next, trying to catch her breath in the middle of her forced smile. "Wow!" she laughed awkwardly. "What a surprise! A heartfelt message, sure, but maybe a little out of place? She glanced toward me like she expected me to blink, maybe shrink. I didn't. She leaned in under her breath as she passed me. "You're humiliating, Mom. You always find a way." "No," I said, eyes never leaving hers. "I just stopped helping her hide it." It was a clean reply, calm, like someone who had waited a very long time for the exact moment to say it. Isolde stepped up to the microphone next, almost desperately. "You know," she said with sudden clarity, "what many people don't realize is that my sister once asked our father to take her out of his will. She said she didn't need us. That's why this," she gestured loosely toward me, "this outburst, it's just a performance. It always has been." The air snapped. A few guests let out audible gasps. Others turned fully toward Verda, who stood just to the side, saying nothing, just nodding, slowly, like she was silently confirming it. I didn't argue. I didn't deny. Not right then. Instead, I walked to the bar. My phone buzzed with a silent notification I ignored. I pulled out a manila folder from my clutch, slipped it toward the man seated at the corner stool. He was a quiet businessman I recognized from 3 industry events. He handled commercial real estate for one of the biggest hotel groups in the Southeast. I didn't say much, just opened the folder and showed him the paperwork. The document was simple. Transfer of ownership, Greenville Heritage Country Club. Signatory, Aelith Holdings, LLC. He looked up at me, blinked. "This place, tonight. You've been the one hosting this?" I gave a single nod. He exhaled sharply. "Damn!" He didn't say anything else, just picked up his drink and walked toward a table near the center of the lounge. Whispers followed him like perfume. I stood in place, watching the ripple move outward. Names mentioned in low voices. Heads turned. The change didn't come in thunder. It came in increments, each realization tipping the room further in my favor. Verda's eyes began scanning the room. She noticed the shift, noticed who wasn't smiling anymore. She straightened her dress, tilted her chin slightly higher. Isolde followed the movement too, but her smile faltered. She tried to re-engage with guests nearby. A joke here, a compliment there, but it all fell flat. The energy had shifted. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't drag anyone across a podium. I simply stood still. And the truth moved without me. They thought noise was power. But sometimes silence spreads faster than fire. Just as Isolde lifted her glass and cleared her throat for the toast she'd clearly rehearsed, the doors opened at the far end of the lounge. Heads turned. Some barely noticed. Others did a double take. Deacon, the valet, walked in. Still in uniform, composed, with the kind of presence that made people instinctively pause. He didn't speak to the crowd. He walked straight to me. "Ms. Aelith," he said, his voice steady but kind. "The executive suite is ready. Shall I escort your guests?" I didn't flinch. I smiled. And for the first time that night, every pair of eyes in the room found me, and didn't look away. I stepped forward slowly, past the tables that had refused to make room for me, past my mother's shocked expression and Isolde's frozen smile. I reached the center of the room, turned to face them, and took the microphone from the stand before Isolde could get to it. "I hadn't planned to speak tonight," I began, voice even. "But since my family forgot to mention who's hosting this evening." A few confused glances, then silence. "I own this club." I let it hang there. "This venue," I said, looking around, "was purchased 6 months ago by my holding company. You've spent the night drinking champagne in rooms I designed, eating at tables I selected, under chandeliers I commissioned." A soft gasp traveled the length of the room like a spilled drink. Verda's face drained a shade, but she didn't move, didn't blink. I was going to keep it quiet. I didn't need recognition. But then my name was left off the guest list, and the seating chart, and the family toast. I pulled a manila envelope from my clutch and handed it to the club director standing near the stage. He flipped through the pages. Each one notarized, sealed, time-stamped. He looked up. Yes, he said simply. All final decisions for tonight's event were made by Ms. Aelith. The silence that followed was deafening. Verda straightened her dress, then let out a practiced laugh. Of course, she said. We were all aware of that. But she overplayed it. The room could smell the lie. They always can, when it's too late. And yet, I replied, turning to her, you printed a guest list without my name. She had nothing left to say. The shift was subtle at first. A woman from the hospital board raised her glass slightly in my direction. Then, a man from the city council followed. Small, quiet gestures of acknowledgement, not pity, respect. And then it became louder. Toasts rose, one by one, until someone near the back said plainly, "To the real host." I didn't raise my glass to myself. I raised it to them. "Thank you," I said, "for coming to my dinner." Isolde stormed out, her heels sharp against the floor, dragging Dean behind her with a half-whispered, "Let's go. This is done." Verda stayed seated, frozen, staring at her own reflection in a half-full glass of wine. For the first time that night, the room was truly mine. The room had been mine for all of 2 minutes, and now it belonged to no one. No music played. The chatter had dulled to a kind of nervous hum, uneven, shallow. I walked slowly through the space, not strutting, not hiding. I wasn't there to collect praise. I was there because I'd already paid the cost of staying away. Some guests nodded when I passed. Others looked at the floor, as if they were afraid guilt was contagious. A few shifted in their seats, clearly wondering how much they'd exposed by laughing at Verda's jokes an hour ago. I paused near the windows, letting the air move around me, letting the weight of the silence do what years of politeness never could. A tall man with a navy tie approached quietly. He was from one of the local development boards. I'd seen him at 3 ribbon cuttings, never said more than hello. "I had no idea," he said, voice low, almost embarrassed. "The club and the villa in Hilton Head? That was you?" I nodded once. He scratched his jaw, chuckled under his breath. "We've all been thanking the wrong people." Across the room, Verda gripped her wine glass so tightly I thought the stem might snap. I walked past her like she wasn't the center anymore. A cluster of younger guests whispered near the bar. I wasn't trying to hear them, but one line rose above the rest. "He left, said he wasn't sticking around for a family implosion." They were talking about Dean, Isolde's fiancé. I turned slowly and noticed her standing alone near the ballroom entrance, scanning the crowd with that tight smile still painted on her face. But he was gone. I spotted his phone on a table, screen still lit. A text preview glared. "This changes everything. I didn't sign up for a family scandal." And just like that, even Isolde, golden girl, heir apparent, was left holding nothing. I drifted toward the fireplace, where Verda stood alone now. The reflection of the flames danced across her face, but she wasn't warmed by it. Just lit. Like a figure in a painting no one wanted to hang. "They'll forget this," she said without looking at me. "In a week, no one will care." "No," I said quietly. "They'll forget the details, but they'll remember the lie." She didn't respond, just kept staring at the fire, still pretending to be the kind of woman who was in control. A staff member passed, offering fresh wine. I declined. Verda reached for hers without blinking. I left her there. I returned to my seat, not the one they'd stripped from me earlier, but the chair I chose for myself. I didn't need an invitation, not anymore. A few minutes later, Verda stepped toward the front, clinking her glass gently to gather attention. Only half the room looked up. She smiled through it anyway, tried to summon the voice that had once commanded any space. "Thank you all," she began, "for being here tonight, for supporting our family." But her voice cracked on that last word. People shifted again. One guest checked his phone. Another whispered to her companion. Verda's sentences slowed. She looked for nods and didn't find them. I sipped my wine. Let the quiet settle. She was still speaking, but no one was really listening. This time, she was the one at the edge of the room, blurred in the background of the story I had reclaimed. When a woman builds the house and they call her a guest, she only has to speak once to take back the deed. The party didn't end. It simply unraveled. Guests didn't leave all at once. They peeled away in layers. Clusters formed in quiet corners, whispers replacing toasts. The music had long stopped. The band stood idle, unsure whether to continue or quietly pack up. I stayed seated near the center of the room, but not as a centerpiece, more like a landmark. I sipped tea now, not wine. My stomach had no room for alcohol, not after what had been poured into this night already. People moved differently around me, slower, more deliberate. Some offered soft nods. One man touched the brim of his glass as he passed. Not quite a toast, but not nothing either. A woman from the city council approached me without fanfare. Her heels clicked softly against the floor, her voice softer than the linen tablecloths. "You changed how I see her," she said, "and you didn't even raise your voice." I didn't answer, but the words stayed with me longer than most compliments ever had. Across the room, Verda was trying too hard. Her laugh rang too loud, her posture too perfect. She'd gathered a few allies, people with old money and old favors, but their smiles were strained. One woman glanced at her watch. Another excused herself to check on the babysitter, though everyone knew her kids were grown. I watched Verda grip her wine glass as if squeezing it would rewind the night. Word had spread. Dean, Isolde's fiancé, had left early. He didn't bother saying goodbye to anyone, just vanished somewhere between dessert and disaster. A guest near the bar whispered that he was seen getting into an Uber before the club director finished verifying the ownership documents. Someone found his phone left on a cocktail table. A message still lit the screen. "This changes everything. I didn't sign up for a family scandal." Isolde had looked for him twice. The third time, she didn't come back. I saw the moment it happened, when the crowd stopped orbiting her and started drifting towards something more stable. And that wasn't her. Not anymore. A contractor who had once been on the club's renovation bid list stepped beside me, holding his drink like it weighed more than usual. "She told me she designed this ballroom," he said, gesturing to the high-arched ceilings. "Said it was all her vision." I raised an eyebrow but stayed quiet. "She didn't sign a single permit," he added. "You did, months ago." He walked away before I could respond. I didn't need to. Even the floor knew whose name had been on the blueprints. Verda gathered a few last loyalists into a circle near the fireplace. She was animated now, recounting some past story with laughter so perfectly timed it felt rehearsed. I watched her hands as she spoke, how they moved in measured gestures, just like the PR consultant had taught her years ago. But the circle kept thinning. Polite nods replaced genuine interest. People glanced toward the exit more often than toward her. Even those who once clung to her invitations were now folding them like napkins, ready to be tossed. I hadn't moved all evening, but the room had moved around me. Eventually, Verda crossed the space alone. No wine, no audience. She stood in front of me with a look that wasn't quite apology and wasn't quite pride. "This doesn't have to stay messy," she said. Her voice was low, tired. I held her gaze. "It already was," I replied. "You just finally looked at it." She didn't flinch, didn't fight. She simply exhaled. Then she turned and walked away, still upright, still poised, but emptier than she had arrived. I didn't need anyone to be sorry. I just needed them to see. The night faded, not with music or speeches, but with the quiet clatter of silverware being cleared. The crowd had thinned to polite clusters. Some guests stood in pairs near the exit, coats draped over their arms, casting glances in my direction. Not curious anymore. Acknowledging, no one clinked a glass. There was no final toast. I remained seated, cradling a cup of warm tea Deacon had brought me without a word. The wine had long lost its appeal. I didn't need to dull anything anymore. One couple passed and offered a gentle smile. Another gave a slight nod. The kinds of gestures people give when they've witnessed something that changed how they see the room, and the people in it. Isolde never came back. Dean was gone. Verda was still somewhere in the lounge, but she wasn't center stage anymore. She hadn't been for a while. Eventually, she passed near my table. She didn't slow, didn't speak. She only gave me a stiff nod, as if the weight of an entire apology could be carried in a glance. It wasn't rage in her eyes this time. It was something far heavier, recognition. Not of my ownership or my title, but of what couldn't be denied any longer. She didn't look back as she walked away. And that was fine. I stood, stretched, and took a quiet walk through the space. Not hurried, not forced. Just slow steps across the floors I'd once tiptoed on as a girl, careful not to make noise when the adults were talking. Now the adults were gone, or reduced to murmurs and shadowed regret. The staff moved efficiently around me, clearing linens, tucking in chairs. One of them paused briefly to say, "Thank you for tonight, ma'am." No flair. Just honest work, honest words. I nodded, catching Deacon's eye near the entrance to the hallway. He gave a subtle bow. "The suite is ready whenever you are, ma'am," he said. "Thank you," I replied, my voice light. Not with pride, but something steadier. Peace. The executive suite had always been there, of course. Top floor, overlooking the gardens. It had just never felt mine before. Tonight, it did. I entered the suite quietly. It was warm, softly lit, impeccably prepared. On the desk was a note, a single line, written in pen, no name at the bottom. "We've always known. Thank you." I didn't need a signature. The weight of those 5 words filled more space than a bouquet ever could. I stepped out onto the balcony and looked out across the lawn. Just hours ago, they tried to keep me from walking through that front door. Now I stood above it all, every inch of the view indisputably mine. There was no celebration, no grand finale, just a long exhale, and the truth stretched quietly across the night sky. They never needed to say sorry. They just needed to stop pretending they were right. Forgiveness wasn't needed, but clarity was, and I had it now. The morning came with a hush. No voices, no glassware clinking, no speeches to overwrite. The executive suite was still dim with the last trace of night when I opened my eyes. The light filtering through the sheer curtains was soft, golden. I slipped out of bed and walked barefoot across the room. The carpet was thick, still freshly vacuumed. My reflection in the mirror was calm. No armor, no performance. Just me. Downstairs, the club was nearly silent. A few staff moved with quiet purpose, folding linens, stacking chairs. I stepped into the ballroom alone. It looked untouched now, reset, as though the night before had only existed in memory. The scent of lemon oil lingered faintly in the air. Deacon stood near the main door, hands behind his back. He spotted me and gave a nod, subtle, dignified. "We were all proud of you yesterday," he said quietly. I walked toward him and reached into my bag. Handed him a small envelope with his name written in ink, clean and centered. "For your next move," I said. He accepted it without a word, but the shift in his posture said everything. Respect was mutual and earned. I stepped outside into the morning light. It was clear and crisp. The kind of morning that reminded you things move forward whether you're ready or not. My car waited out front. I drove without music, letting the road hum beneath the tires. The club faded in the rearview mirror. No grand goodbye, no final look. Just distance. Downtown Greenville was just beginning to wake. I parked near a corner cafe I hadn't visited in years. It was the kind of place I used to hold client meetings when I didn't want anyone to know who I was. When I was building something in silence, the barista looked up, saw me, and didn't blink. She nodded, poured my regular without a word, slid it across the counter. That meant more than applause. I took my coffee to a table by the window. The view hadn't changed. Brick sidewalks, crepe myrtles blooming early, a father walking his daughter to school. I used to wonder what it would feel like to have that kind of quiet certainty. Now I realized I'd built mine one brick at a time, just less visibly. My phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. "Ms. Lovell," a voice said on the other end, "we received your proposal from last fall. We'd like to move forward. The community initiative in Charleston, we think you're the right person to lead it." I didn't pause. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready. Quiet power still builds cities." After the call, I pulled a notepad from my bag. Tucked inside was an envelope I'd been carrying around for months, addressed to Verda. I unfolded the letter. "You taught me how to hide," I'd written. "I taught myself how to rise." I didn't cry, didn't second-guess it. I walked outside to the cafe's patio, sat near the fire pit, and held the letter over the flame. The paper curled, blackened, vanished. No anger, no vengeance, just choice. I didn't need to burn bridges. I just didn't need to walk them anymore. I sat with my coffee, watched the day unfold. The room was mine. The legacy was mine. But the future? That's where I'm really going. There's something quietly powerful about walking away from a place you built. Not in anger, not in defeat, but in peace. I didn't get the apology. I didn't need it. What I needed was clarity, and I got that, not from their mouths, but from their silence. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. You don't have to prove your worth to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes, dignity means standing your ground. Other times, it means walking out the door with your name intact. To anyone watching who's ever been written out of the room they helped build, whether it's in your family, your job, or your community, remember this. You can reclaim your name even if no one else speaks it. The truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just stands still and lets the lies collapse around it. What about you? Have you ever been made to feel like a guest in your own story? How did you respond? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this story touched you in any way, drop a 1 in the comments or tell me where you're watching from. And if it didn't resonate, tell me why. This space is for real voices. If you found meaning in this video, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what comes next. We have more stories that speak to the heart, the struggle, and the strength of everyday lives across America. Because the truth? Sometimes the room doesn't change. You do. And that's more than enough.